Before we get them in here, I was handed 2 printouts from the Florida Bar, as well as 2 names on the back of a business card. Did everybody have a chance to look at each other's names?
Yes.
Submitted? There's no additional names or any issues that counsel for Ray Greenlaw saw?
No, I'm not familiar with any of these people, but I don't know.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Mine, you didn't have anything
I don't
additional?
know.
All right, I just want to make sure that we had full opportunity and everybody submitted what they could, and I appreciate that, and we'll get that list prepared.
And Judge, I'm going to send the attorney profiles for both Ms. White and Ms. Shamro to Brooke,
Okay,
just so it's not just a name I pulled there.
thank you. All right, we'll prepare that list for deliberations. Is there anything else we need to address before we bring the jury back in? Did you give me a thumbs up? Are they here?
No, I haven't checked out.
Go ahead and check. Very much, if they're all here.
Immediate return?
Yes.
Jury. Jury. Jury may be seated.
Everyone else may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin with the final set of instructions, and I promise you it's much shorter than the first time, I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, I'll remind you that each of you are going to have a complete set of all of the instructions so that you can mark on and do whatever you wish to for purposes of your deliberations going back and forth between the various counts and elements. In addition, all of the, well, I'll start with the indictments. The indictments that were filed against each of these defendants will also be sent back with you so that you can compare that to the elements if you feel that that's appropriate. You may take your notes with you this time. This is the one time you'd like to leave the courtroom, but you can take your notes with you for reference purposes. And all evidence that has been presented in this trial will be sent with you back into the jury room. I don't believe there were any depositions specifically put into evidence, but you will not get the depositions. Other than that, all the evidence that has been addressed or introduced during this trial will be in the jury room with you. Don't worry, the firearms have locks on them. You get angry with each other, there's nothing you can do about it. But they will be back there with you for observation or looking at it if you choose. All right, let me read these final instructions to you. These are some general rules that apply to your deliberations. You must follow these rules in order to return a lawful verdict. You must follow the law as it is set out in all of the instructions. If you fail to follow the law, your verdict will be a miscarriage of justice. There is no reason for failing to follow the law in this case. All of us are depending upon you to make a wise and legal decision in this matter. This case must be decided only upon the evidence that you have heard from the testimony of the witnesses and have seen in the form of exhibits and evidence and these instructions. This case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or you are angry at anyone. Remember that the lawyers are not on trial. Your feelings about them should not influence your decision in this case. Your duty is to determine if the defendant has been proven guilty or not in accordance with the law. It is my job to determine what an appropriate sentence would be if the defendants are found guilty. Whatever verdict you render must be unanimous. That is, each juror must agree to the same verdict. Your verdict should not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and on the law contained in these instructions. Deciding a verdict is exclusively your job. I cannot participate in that decision in any way. Please disregard anything I may have said or done that made you believe that I preferred one verdict over another. A separate crime is charged against each defendant in each count of the indictment. The defendants have been tried together. However, the charges against each defendant and the evidence applicable to him must be considered separately. A finding of guilty or not guilty as to one of the defendants must not affect your verdict as to the other defendant or other crimes charged. You may find the defendants guilty as charged in the indictment or guilty of such lesser included crimes as the evidence may justify, or not guilty. If you return a verdict of guilty, it should be for the highest offense which has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If you find that no offense has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then of course your verdict must be not guilty. Only one verdict may be returned as to each crime charged. This verdict must be unanimous, that is, all of you must agree to the same verdict. The verdict must be in writing, and for your convenience, a necessary form of verdict has been prepared for you. A separate verdict form has been prepared for each defendant. I want to go over the verdict form with you just to make sure that it's clear. We worked to make sure that it was clear as possible for you, but if it's not at least explained to you up front, then you might have some questions about it. And again, I know you're not going to be able to see the words from here, but at least you can see the form that I want to show to you. There is a verdict as to each count, and under each count it says you can only check one option under the count. We'll look first at the verdict form for Wayne Greenlaw. Count 1, first-degree murder, Brian Leverett, check only one. Part 1, guilty of the charge of first-degree murder, guilty of the charge of second-degree murder, guilty of the charge of manslaughter, not guilty. You would only check one of those 4 lines. If you find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder or manslaughter only, you must answer the following question. Did the defendant discharge a firearm causing great bodily harm or death to Brian Leverett? If you found Wayne Greenlaw guilty of either second-degree murder or manslaughter, that's the only opportunity you would have to check that yes or no box. If you don't find him guilty of either of those crimes, you don't need to check that box. And then for count 2, shooting into a building, there's only 3 options, but you would check only one of those, and that's indicated again. The verdict form would then be dated and signed by the foreperson. Now, Ray Greenlaw's verdict form is a little different, as he has an additional charge of attempted murder of Justin Riley. Same page, front page for him as to count 1, the murder of Brian Leverett. Same options and same opportunity to check yes or no if you find him guilty of second-degree murder or manslaughter only. But then there is a difference as to Ray Greenlaw, and that is count 2, attempted first-degree murder of Justin Riley, and you have 5 options under that category. And just to remind you of what the jury instructions say, your options are guilty of the charge of attempted first-degree murder, guilty of the charge of attempted second-degree murder, guilty of the charge of attempted manslaughter by act, guilty of the charge of aggravated battery, or not guilty. You would check only one of those 5 options. There's a part 2 to this one as well that reads, if you find the defendant guilty of either attempted first-degree murder, attempted second-degree murder, or attempted manslaughter by act, you have another question to answer as to whether or not he carried, displayed, used, or threatened to use a weapon in the course of committing that crime against Justin Riley. If you read it clearly, it makes sense. You make your decision first as to which option you choose. And then if that option is reflected in part 2, you then need to answer the yes or no question. And then count 3, shooting into the building, just as we discussed with Wayne Greenlaw. And again, the foreperson would date and sign that verdict form. So there's 2 verdict forms that need to be completed, signed, and dated, and brought back into the courtroom when you have finished. In just a few moments, you will be taken to the jury room by the bailiff. The first thing you should do is to choose a foreperson who will preside over your deliberations. The foreperson should see to it that your discussions are carried on in an organized way and that everyone has a fair chance to be heard. It is also the foreperson's job to sign and date the verdict form when all of you have agreed on a verdict and to bring the verdict form back to the courtroom when you return. During deliberations, jurors must communicate about the case only with one another and only when all jurors are present in the jury room. You are not to communicate with any person outside the jury about this case. Until you have reached a verdict, you must not talk about this case in person or through the telephone, writing, electronic communication such as a blog, Twitter, email, text message, or any other means. And as we discussed several days ago, if you have a cell phone, laptop, or iPad or other tablet with you, Deputy Murchison will be taking possession of those during the course of the deliberations. And that is so that there's no temptation to address that or to be unintentionally contacted by someone while you're back there. So it's just talking in your notes and paper. We're doing this the old-fashioned way. So just so you know. And again, we talked about if you're concerned that somebody might need to call you for any reason, you can leave your phone on. Deputy Murchison will answer any phone that rings, and she will indicate to that person that you're not available. But is this an emergency? If it were an emergency, we would address it as we see appropriate under the circumstances. So if you have that concern, she'll answer the phone. Otherwise, you can just turn your phone off. That's your choice. All of these communication rules apply until I discharge you at the very end of the case. If you become aware of any violation of these instructions or any other instruction I have given you, you must tell me by giving a note to the bailiff. If you need to communicate with me, send a note through the bailiff signed by the foreperson. If you have questions, I will need to talk with the attorneys before I answer, so it may take some time before we get an answer back to you. You may continue your deliberations while you wait for my answer. I will answer any questions, if I can, in writing or orally here in court. During the trial, items were received into evidence as exhibits, and you may examine whatever exhibits you wish that you think will help you in your deliberations. As I indicated, all of these will be sent into the jury room with you when you begin to deliberate. However, several of the items that were introduced into evidence, such as the video statements of the 2 defendants, can only be viewed here in the courtroom. We don't have the audio, video equipment back in the deliberation room. So if there's any portion of that you feel you need to see again, you would need to write a note, let me know, and we'll get it set up for that. In closing, let me remind you that it is important that you follow the law spelled out in these instructions in deciding your verdict. There are no other laws that apply to this case. Even if you do not like the laws that must be applied, you must use them. For 2 centuries, we have lived by the Constitution and the law, and no juror has the right to violate those rules that we all share. At this time, it's my obligation. To me, this is the hardest part of the trial, especially the trial of this type. 3 of you were selected as alternates. And those of you that have served on a jury before probably knew that that was the case. You may have even known that a jury of this type is comprised of 12 individuals, and you've been counted off and up over the last 2 weeks. You know there's 15 of them. Why did we do that? Until this very moment, when those 12 people walked back into the door, we had to make sure we had 12 people. And when you have a trial of this length, there are people that become ill, have an accident, can't complete their job as a juror. So the alternates are necessary to have sat through everything, understand everything, heard all the jury instructions, and think they were a juror. So we don't even identify who the alternates are so that you pay as much and full attention as the individuals who were selected as the jurors. So for that reason, an alternate's job is just as important as a juror's job, because you need to be fully prepared to be part of the deliberations. And yes, you won't be able to participate in the deliberations, but that doesn't mean your job was not as important. I want to let the alternates know before I release them. Should you wish, you have every right to remain in the courtroom to hear the jury's verdict. We don't know when that might be, but you're certainly welcome to stay. So you're not required to leave, but you're certainly welcome to leave, and you are relieved of all of the communication instructions that I have given you. And when I prepared the seating chart, I didn't do a very good job. Deputy Murchison pointed that out to me. We try to put the jurors on one end so they're easily can get out. I didn't do that. I kind of mixed it up a little bit, and I apologize. But based on your new numbers 1 through 15, juror 1, juror 8, and juror number 10 are alternates. You are excused at this time.
Have your notepads, please.
Journal bar 1.
He went out straight.
Can we just see one thing before we do this? Deputy Murchison has all of your contact information or knows where you will be. If you are going to be leaving the building at any time, you need to advise one of the bailiffs here in the courtroom of that. And just need to confirm with her that she has all of that before I excuse you. And just make sure you have everybody's contact information.
I don't have anything except for Mr. Mott. If you're all gonna stay together with Mr. Mott, that's fine. But other than that, I have none.
Somebody had a cell phone or PD?
I have his PD
I
on
know, just close at 4:30.
extension. Let's see if I have it. Yes, 8475. Is your extension? That's what I got. Right. Is that where y'all are going?
Till 4:30, then we'll come back up and give you a cell phone.
No problem.
All right, we're on recess until we have a question or a verdict.